Hello, greetings to all my sisters and brothers in the profession. I'd like to begin by saying that we are all fortunate to be in this noble profession, which is associated with the dispensation of justice. In my opinion, there is no other profession which provides such a diverse experience touching so many facets of the human life like the legal profession. It is a profession which is built on skills. And today I'd like to share some of my thoughts on what I consider as 6 essential skills that a lawyer needs to possess. And bearing in mind the interest of the junior members of the bar, I'd like to share my thoughts on how to acquire those skills. Now, the first among the skills that I would refer to is the skill of knowledge of law. These days, there are broad areas of specialization in the legal practice. Some of us have chosen civil constitutional practice, some have chosen criminal, some prefer tax, and some service law. So there are various domains of practice that each of us are engaged in. Now, when I say that you need to have the knowledge of law, I do not mean that you need to know every law that is made by the legislature. But I mean that you should have authoritative knowledge of all the legislations that apply to your practice domain. For instance, if you are a practitioner on the civil side, you should have inside out knowledge of all the fundamental legislations that apply to the civil practice. Now let me give an illustrative list. If you are on the civil side, the fundamental legislations that would apply to you are the Civil Procedure Code, the Rules of Practice, the Evidence Act, the Contract Act, the Transfer of Property Act, the Specific Relief Act. So these are all some of the fundamental legislations. Similarly, if you're practicing on the criminal side, the Criminal Procedure Code, the Indian Penal Code, and the Evidence Act. So you need to have authoritative knowledge of the fundamental legislations that apply to your legal practice. Now, you should be in such authoritative position that if someone were to bring a brief dealing with any circumstance or situation, you should be in a position to provide the exact solution as to which law or which principle should be applied. The distinction is that not just knowing the basics of the law, but it is knowing the law completely, at least the fundamental legislations. And when I say that you need to have authoritative knowledge, I also mean that not just knowing the statutes, but you should also be aware of all the leading judgments on the key provisions of the Act, and you should also be aware of all the amendments that have taken place to those fundamental legislations. It is this knowledge that makes you gain an authoritative control over the legislations. Now, how does one gain such authoritative knowledge over law? It's not going to be easy. There is a lot of hard work. You need to keep reading the statutes. And when I say you need to read the statutes, it is not just some of the provisions that you regularly deal with, but it is end to end. From the very first provision till the last provisions, you need to keep reading. Now, in the legal profession, we all evolve. We gain professional maturity as and when we evolve. And in different phases of our life, each time we read a particular provision, we see a new layer of dimension in those provisions. So therefore, you need to keep reading. You need to keep updating your knowledge. Not just the statutory provisions. You should also keep reading the leading judgments on those particular provisions. Update yourself with all the amendments. So this is what will make you gain authoritative knowledge of the law. So the first skill that I'm going to emphasize upon is having authoritative knowledge of the law. The second skill that I would refer to is being the master of facts. Now, each case brings with it its own set of facts. Now, you should be a master of the facts in the sense that you should not only know the bundle of facts that the client brings in or that a brief brings in, but you should also have thorough information and knowledge of all the surrounding and attending circumstances, and also a good knowledge of all the documents that you are going to place reliance upon. Now, once you have a mastery over the facts, you wear a new confidence when you go to the court. Now, whenever you appear in court, the the mastery of the facts would always give you that extra edge. There is a distinct advantage in having mastery over the facts, and that is the court would be receptive to you. On the other hand, if you stutter on facts, you are always creating some hurdles between you and the court. So therefore, having mastery over the facts is one of the key and essential skills that you need to possess. Now, how does one gain mastery over the facts? Well, it begins with listening with rapt attention to the narration of the facts by the client, and making of notes, preparation of list of dates, preparation of the list of documents, going through all the documents and gaining what I call as absolute intimacy over all the facts of the case. Now, mastery over the facts of the case is required at all stages and facets of the profession. When you are sitting down to draft the pleadings, you need to have absolute mastery over the facts. You need it at the time of the trial and at the time of hearing, be it the interlocutory or preliminary or the final stage. Knowledge of the mastery of the fact is always essential. So therefore, the second skill that I would emphasize is being the master of the facts. Now, the third skill that I would refer to is one of the significant skills that all lawyers need to possess. That is the skill of persuasion. Now, we are all lawyers and our main job is to persuade the court. Now, what does persuasion mean? It means to convince the court. Now, it is to convince the court to concur with our submissions and to grant the relief that we seek. Now, it's not going to be an easy task to persuade or to convince the court. Now, for the court to be persuaded, the court has to find your presentation of facts very comprehensible. Now, for that, you need to have absolute clarity in your expression. Now, unless there is clarity in your expression, and all this should happen in the quickest possible time. Now, if you need to have clarity in your expression, you need to have clarity in your thought. So please see the sequence. If all those facts and the law are all jumbled up in your mind, that would not help you have clarity at all. So first you need to ensure that there is clarity in your thought, and that should manifest into clarity of expression. And when there is clarity of expression, it's much more easier to persuade the court. Now, how does one gain the skill of persuasion? Now, there are three ingredients in my opinion which are necessary. The first two are that I have already touched upon. That is, having the knowledge of law, authoritative knowledge of law, and having mastery over the facts. Now, the third is knowing the court. Now, knowing the court would mean knowing what are the expectations of the court and how do you meet those expectations. Now, each court conducts the proceedings in its own way. Each court has its own set of queries. Some courts want you to make elaborate submissions. Some court may want you to be very brief. In some court, there is room for play of wit and humor. So therefore, you need to understand what are the expectations of the court and play accordingly. Now, these days, we have a lot of waiting time in the court. So you need to be observant and observe what are the queries made by the court. What does the court expect from the counsel? And how does one meet those expectations? Now, if you are able to meet the expectations of the court, then it's much more easier to persuade the court. So the skill of persuasion is something that good lawyers need to develop in order to gain a distinct advantage in the profession. Now, the fourth skill that I'm going to refer to is one of the important ammunition that the arsenal of lawyers need to have, and that is command over English language. Now, I'm aware of the fact that English is a foreign language, but there is no denial of the fact that most of our legislations are in English. The language of the Superior Court is English. A whole lot of business correspondence and documentation takes place in English. So therefore, English is a predominant language in our legal system. And the legal profession is all about language, isn't it? Whichever stage that you take, whether be it the stage of pleading, whether be it the stage of trial or the hearing, there is always language which is at play. At some point of time, some word or some expression would always fall for interpretation of the court. And in a common law system like ours, where the courts have very wide amplitude in interpretation, it is the command over the English language that would give you an extra edge. So therefore, having a wide vocabulary and good command over the English language is always an essential skill that you need as a lawyer. Now, how does one gain this command over the English language? Well, there are three things that are required. There's a read, read, and read. Now, what do you read? You read everything that is connected to the legal profession. You read judgments, you read the old judgments, you read the new judgments, you read English judgments, you read articles, you read blogs, you read speeches. And these days, you can also listen to speeches. Now, I would also recommend that you read biographies and autobiographies of the legal luminaries. Now, there is a twin advantage in reading these biographies. One, you improve upon your language, and then number two, you also get inspired by the lives of these greats. So therefore, sharpening your English language skills on a regular basis is one of the key skills that you need to possess in the legal profession. Now, before I go on to the skill number 5, I would like to point out that the difference between ordinary and extraordinary is in the finer nuances. Now, for instance, why is Virat Kohli an extraordinary batsman? There are so many other batsmen in the world. They also bat. But what makes him extraordinary? It is one of those finer nuances. Now, one such finer nuance which applies to our profession is attention to detail. Now, our profession is all about details. Whichever facet of the profession, it is paying attention to the details is what distinguishes from the ordinary to the extraordinary. It is very easy to just copy, paste and prepare on the basis of an existing format to prepare a pleading and file. That's very ordinary. But it requires an extraordinary effort to pay attention to details. Now, paying attention to details is something that should be innate to our profession. By not paying attention, you're always giving room for errors to creep in. And in this profession, if you allow errors to creep in, you are giving advantage to the other side to take advantage of it, and the courts are not going to take it kindly. And also remember, we are a very procedure-driven system. So therefore, every time there is an error and you want to rectify the error, it will always set you back in time and in your efforts. So therefore, the only way that you ensure that no error creeps in is by paying attention to details at all times. Now, let me also give a couple of examples as to how not paying attention to details can set you back. Now, let us say a client comes to you with a case for eviction of a tenant. He produces a copy of the lease deed which he and the tenant have entered into. And then for certain ground of non-payment of the rent, he wants the tenant to be evicted. Then you notice that there is a dispute resolution clause in the lease deed according to which the disputes have to be referred to arbitration. And after doing all the preliminary work, you take steps for the initiation of arbitration proceedings, and you file a petition before the High Court for appointment of an arbitrator. And once you file the petition, you notice that the other side points out that the lease deed is not sufficiently stamped and it required compulsory registration and it is not registered. And what is the consequence? Firstly, the document is impounded and client is called upon to pay the stamp duty along with a huge lot of penalty. And the document is not registered is an incurable defect. So therefore, this leads to a whole lot of complications, and all this because of not paying due attention at the time of filing of the case. Now, this can happen at all stages. You may cite a judgment by reading only the head note or by reading only some provisions. So, the point that I'm trying to make is that you need to get into a habit of paying attention to the details at all stages of the legal profession. Now, that is what going to make you extraordinary. So therefore, attention to detail is an essential skill that you need to possess. The last of this skill that I'm going to refer to is of creativity. Now, creativity is not the exclusive domain of artists alone. Creativity is there in the legal profession as well. A good draft is a piece of an art. An outstanding argument can be a piece of art. A skillful cross-examination can be a piece of art. So there is creativity in the legal profession. Now, creativity should manifest in everything that we do. By creativity, I mean looking beyond the ordinary. It is the use of the mind to explore possibilities and create alternatives and explore newer possibilities, a new idea. Now, by creativity, I also mean that, for instance, in drafting of pleadings, as opposed to long, winding, repetitive, verbose drafting, creativity would mean that your drafting is very crisp, straightforward, and very reader friendly. Similarly, in your submission as well, that there is creativity in the sense that it's very easy and comprehensible for the court to follow your submissions. Creativity would also mean use of legal maxims. Creativity would also mean that you use newer ideas in making your pleading or your submission interesting. Now, let me give an example. It is because of the creativity of Nani Palkewala as a lawyer and creativity of Justice H.R. Khanna as the judge that we have today the doctrine of basic structure. But for their creativity, we would not have had the all-important doctrine of the basic structures. Now, there are so many doctrines in our profession. Now, what is the genesis of this doctrine? It is because of the creativity of some learned counsel and some learned judge. So therefore, the element of creativity is all important in the legal profession. Creativity would also mean using of wit and humor. Now, our profession is full of anecdotes of wit and humor. Otherwise, the proceedings would be very mundane. So therefore, introduction of that element of creativity is very, very important in the legal profession. So therefore, these are the 6 essential skills that I feel are important for all lawyers to possess. Now, apart from these skills, I would like to refer to one other quality which is not essentially a skill, but a quality that all the lawyers need to possess, and that is empathy to client. Now, it is the client who is responsible for our practice. It is because of him that we are able to operate our practice, go to the court and run our practice. I remember a statement made by Mahatma Gandhi in relation to the importance of a customer, and he said, we are not doing a favor to the customer by providing him service. Rather, he has done a favor to us by giving us an opportunity to serve. The very same thing applies to our profession as well. We are not doing a favor to our client by serving him. Rather, the client has given us an opportunity. He is doing a favor to us by giving us an opportunity to serve. For us, there are so many cases to handle. For him, for the client, it could be the only case, and his life may be dependent on that. So therefore, we need to have that empathy, get into his shoes and feel what he feels. And I feel that having empathy for the client would give us that extra juice to go and fight the case for him. So therefore, friends, with these thoughts, I wish everybody all the best in the profession. Thank you.